Good evening. We'll go ahead and call this public hearing to order. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and make some cleanup notes. I want to let everyone know that due to the amount of people that have signed up to provide public testimony, we will be limiting public testimony to 2 minutes. If you feel those 2 minutes are not enough and you want to say more, please feel free to send us an email. We've received a lot of written public testimony as well that the board has reviewed. So if you feel the 2 minutes are not enough, please feel free to send us in your comments and we'll review them before our working session that we have scheduled. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. It is 5:07 p.m. Can those on Zoom please mute yourselves, please?
Ms. Vivian Chambers, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is 5:07 p.m. It is Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. This is a public hearing for the Thurston County Shoreline Master Program update. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. To my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, Assistant County Manager Rob Gelder, and staff. And we have our Clerk of the Board, Jamie Codwell. The purpose of this public hearing is to accept and consider public comment on the proposed comprehensive and periodic updates to the Shoreline Master Program. This is a hybrid public hearing. Those wishing to testify have joined in person, by Zoom, emailed in comment, or mailed in comment. If you wish to testify, please visit the Thurston County homepage online and select Board of County Commissioner meetings, hearings, and work sessions agendas on the right-hand side. The information to join this public hearing remotely has been posted there. If you do not wish to testify but would like to listen and follow along, please watch the live stream through the Thurston County YouTube channel to help us manage attendance. Andrew DeFobis, Senior Planner, will provide information on this topic. After I will read names out loud on the sign-up sheet to indicate when is your turn to come forward and provide testimony. If you mark no on this sheet, I will still call your name just in case someone changes their mind. And then after that, we will move on to the Zoom screen and the county manager will help me in calling those who have joined us via Zoom. And then I will come back to the boardroom in case someone in the boardroom changed their mind, and we'll receive public testimony that way as well. You will have 2 minutes to testify. Time may not be given to another person. When you are called on, please state your name and address for the record. The public hearing is now open. Andrew will now provide background information of the proposed amendment, written comments submitted, and any additional information requested by the board.
Good evening, Chair Mejia and Commissioners. I'm Andrew DeFobis, Senior Planner with Thurston County Community Planning and the project lead for the Shoreline Master Program update. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to accept public comment on the proposed updates to the Thurston County SMP, which regulates development and redevelopment along the shoreline. This code amendment includes both comprehensive and periodic elements required by state law. Thurston County is proposing these updates under the authority provided by RCW 9058-020 and as part of the periodic review process under RCW 9058-080 Section 4. In 1971, the state adopted the Shoreline Management Act, or the Act, requiring counties and cities to develop a master program for shorelines that are subject to that act. Those shorelines generally include Puget Sound, lakes and reservoirs 20 acres or larger, streams with a flow of more than 20 cubic feet per second, lands within 200 feet of these water bodies known as shorelands, and wetlands and floodplains associated with these water bodies. The Shoreline Management Act outlines 3 broad policies in RCW 9058-020 to protect the environmental resources of state shorelines, to promote public access and enjoyment opportunities, and to give priority to uses that require a shoreline location. The Act also requires periodic updates to the SMP to incorporate changes to state law and best available information. The county's current SMP was adopted in 1990. However, in 2003, the Department of Ecology revised its legally binding guidelines, and over the 33 years since its adoption, much has changed. The proposed updates to the SMP will include the current best available information and balance growth and development consistent with protections that prioritize healthy and safe shorelines for people, fish, and wildlife. The proposed code amendment is a repeal and replacement of the existing SMP and includes incorporation of updates in state law, proposed changes to shoreline jurisdiction maps, shoreline environment designations, and development standards, additional flexibility for modifying existing development in shoreline jurisdiction and uses that may be allowed in shoreline buffers, and increased clarity and streamlining of the permit process. As required by the Shoreline Management Act, the Thurston County update will include critical areas within shoreline jurisdiction, and the update will also include the buffers necessary to protect critical areas. Communication with the public about this update began early and has been ongoing. Staff obtained public input early in draft development via stakeholder meetings, open houses, and through the Planning Commission's dedicated work to carefully review the proposed changes. The Planning Commission reviewed the SMP update over 81 work sessions between 2017 and 2022. An in-person public house was held in 2018, and a virtual open house was launched ahead of the Planning Commission's October 2021 public hearing. The Planning Commission issued its recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on August 3rd, 2022. Notice of this hearing was published in the Olympian, the Thurston County's newspaper of record, on March 30th, 2023. Webmails were sent to the department's email subscriber list on April 6th, April 19th, and May 5th. The public hearing was posted on the department's social media accounts on April 20th, May 5th, and May 10th, and the county issued a press release on May 5th, 2023. Physical copies of the public hearing draft were made available in the Building Development Center of the Thurston County Atrium, and documents are available online at www.thurstonsmp.org. A State Environmental Policy Act mitigated determination of non-significance was issued on May 12th, and the comment period on this SEPA determination is open through May 26th, 2023. Staff have been available to answer questions and attend stakeholder meetings at the public's request. Since the Planning Commission recommendation was issued, staff have received 79 written public comments. This includes 53 comments since the board began briefings on the SMP in February of this year. Some topics expressed thus far include comments regarding both the Planning Commission recommendation and the minority report, concerns about how the update may affect specific properties, and concerns regarding private property rights, encouragement to protect shorelines and their ecological functions, comments on how the draft SMP accounts for future impacts to our shorelines, comments on specific sections of the draft, such as how non-conforming structures are labeled, or comments on specific shoreline uses and modifications, such as docks, bulkheads, and aquaculture, the appropriateness of the proposed shoreline environment designations and requests to redesignate some shoreline reaches, and one comment regarding the SEPA determination. After the close of this public hearing, there are 2 work sessions scheduled for the board to consider public testimony regarding the SMP update, Wednesday, May 24th at 9 a.m., and Wednesday, June 14th, also at 9 a.m. Ultimately, once the board adopts an SMP update, it will be submitted to the Department of Ecology for review, and the update will take effect upon formal approval by Ecology. That concludes my remarks for the evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have prior to accepting public comment on this proposal.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions from the board? Commissioner Edwards?
No, we've heard from the board, we've heard from staff a lot over this issue. So looking forward to hear what the citizens have to say. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Mincer?
Yeah, a couple things. So early you said the I don't know if I'm not use that word right, jurisdiction, but you do mention 200 feet from the shores that you identified the different categories. Is that a jurisdictional limit? Meaning if there was I believe there are existing 250-foot buffers in certain places or proposals, would that be then beyond the scope of what we're allowed to do, or?
Specifically for the marine riparian buffers that you're speaking about, I believe the proposal was, because marine shorelines are shorelines in addition to being critical areas, the proposal was to limit the buffers to that shoreline jurisdiction. But other types of critical areas, such as wetlands or steep slopes that might occur further away from that shoreline, are included in the master program.
They are.
Yes.
And then the question,
yeah.
the question of shoreline designation, is that before the board as well as part of this update?
Absolutely.
If somebody got changed from one designation to another
Yep.
or remained? And what would be the process for us to engage on, at that level, if there was a discrepancy or we had a concern about a designation change that happened or didn't happen?
So during the work session that's scheduled for next week, I'll be bringing back a summary of the issues that were expressed in written testimony and what we hear tonight for the board to begin to choose how you want to proceed and any further changes you wish to make to the draft before you consider adoption. That would include a reexamination of some of those shoreline environment designations should the board wish to reexamine that.
Okay, thank you.
It's definitely on my radar to bring that before you for your decision. So,
Thank you, Andrew.
thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll move into public testimony. If I mispronounce your name, I do apologize. First person is Rob Kirkwood.
Are we gonna have, okay, very good.
Hello, I'm Rob Kirkwood. I'm here with my wife Valerie Hammett. We live at 215 Maple Park Avenue Southeast in Olympia. We own property at 4424 65th Avenue Northeast, which is on Henderson Inlet. We bought the property in 1989, zoned 1 house, 1 acre. We were down zoned to 1 house per 5 acres. We beat the punch and we short platted 3 pieces of property. The shoreline setback renders one of those pieces of property pretty much unusable. It reduces the 1 acre to 2/3 of an acre. So to make it short, we support the rural conservancy setback of 125 feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Janine Gates. No? Okay. Next, I have Brian Moorhead.
Good evening. My name is Brian Muirhead. My wife and I live at 6527 Alternate Lane. We have 2 parcels on Patterson Lake. The issue we have is within the SED current designation of one of our parcels at 2712 or 6712 Alternate Lane is currently split. It's partial rural and it's partial conservancy, and would be changed to 100% natural under the new SMP. With expert analysis, we've determined that it's not appropriate or warranted to make this designation, and it would significantly impact the use and the maintenance of our property. I attended the Planning Commission meeting where this was discussed in April of 2022. At that time, the partial issue was presented to staff. They used an assessment based largely on review of limited aerial images, and the staff recommended that the natural designation be used. Without hearing our specific concerns, the Planning Commission accepted the staff recommendation. We retained certified local wetland and soil scientist Lisa Palazzi and land use and environmental lawyer Heather Burgess, who evaluated the situation, prepared a formal position paper for presentation to you. We prepared that and completed and delivered it to Andrew back on November of 2022. The primary finding was that the designation of natural for our parcel is neither appropriate or warranted under the Shoreline Management Act and the Ecology's SMP guidelines. So we're coming to the county board with a request that the existing split designation for the reach on our property be maintained, but with revised designations associated with shoreline residential for one part and urban conservancy for the rest. We request that you direct your staff to formally evaluate the analysis that we've provided, respond to us, and make the appropriate changes to the SED for our parcel. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Ruth Richard, and you marked no, but just making sure you haven't changed your mind.
Say,
Ruth Richard?
I'm not.
No, okay. Next, I have John Cosley.
Good evening. My name is John Cosley, and my wife Melody and I own 9 acres parcel, which is at 3125 46th Avenue. basically encompasses the north shore of the Green Cove estuary on the Eld Inlet. Melody and I are here today to strongly object to the proposed change of the SED on our property from conservancy, which it's been for the last 30 years, to natural. And in seeking help with this issue, we engaged Joe Rayberger, an attorney with the Cascadia Law Group, who submitted a letter to you folks. I believe it was in your packet, hopefully. I would ask that you read that. It gives a lot of background, a lot more than I have time here to cover. But I do want to take just a minute to try and summarize briefly a couple of important points. First and foremost, the natural SED is completely inappropriate for our property. As you probably know, natural is really a designation that is designed for intact, undeveloped areas with minimal human or no human use, if not minimal. In our case, we have a residence with, it's been there for 60 years, and it's completely within that 200-foot buffer zone. So there's a real mismatch there. There have also been other modifications to the property, which I won't get into. But secondly, we have a strong objection to the process that we faced in this endeavor. The property became recommended for change from conservancy to natural. We had essentially no prior notice to that. In fact, the published recommendation from the planning department was that it be rural conservancy, which we agreed with. During the planning commission meeting, this was sort of hoodwinked and changed by a suggestion of one person to that rather than I'm running out of time.
Please wrap it
Okay,
up,
I'm
sir.
sorry. Just 1 second. We waited a year to get this out, so my wife and I recognize this is a very complex process, and you guys have a lot on your hands, and there's many details, and it's hard to look at any individual one. But nevertheless, we're your constituents. We're asking for your help. We feel like this has been a flawed process for us anyway, and it's an inappropriate designation. So thanks for your help.
Next, I have Hee Soon Jun.
Thank you. I'm actually in the north-south side of Green Cove, 3100 Sunset Beach Drive, Northwest. I request the same. My property should remain conservancy. Because if you look at your flyer, it says about, I'm talking about this flyer. It says about the reaches these designated shoreline residential if they were platted and or developed for more intense residential area. And my property is 35 of the County Club Park Division number 3, which was platted in 1969. In 1978, the lot was developed as a single family residence. So technically, it's a shoreline residential, but it's been conservancy, and it's fine so far. So the first owner was from 1979 to 1993. I bought a house in 1993. And for the past 45 years, we've been really taking care of there in terms of closing the creek trail. I live near the creek trail. I paid my own money to save the buffer not to be really deteriorated. That was 2005. If you want to see, I have board minutes here. And so it's been intact. And so many people say it's a pristine. Of course it is. My neighbor Eric takes care of that too. He plants trees and so forth too. So that was one thing. The other one is
Please wrap it up, ma'am.
methodologically, there are flaws. For example, never anyone actually include our opinions, people who are living there. The person who represented as a person of our area who was not our area, and her opinion was weighed quite a bit.
Thank you, ma'am.
Please wrap it up, ma'am.
We have to move on to the next person. If you would like to submit written public comments, you're more than welcome.
I did already. Thank you very much.
Next is Ann Van Sovereign.
Hi, my name is Ann Van Swearingen, Central Street, Northeast Olympia. I represent 5 Thurston environmental nonprofits, and I have a few last points to make. We support management designed to achieve no net loss and net gain in shoreline ecological functions. As the SMP is implemented, the county will need to identify methods to track shoreline conditions and permit activity. Now, DFW has a proviso that states if we don't establish a system for metrics, it will eventually happen through existing regulations, and we don't really want that to happen. And a streamlined system at the county will increase transparency and far outweigh the benefits to the public, the environment, and climate change in the long run. Now, I have a point about vegetation, and I'd like to say that vegetation required during mitigation sequencing must be native and not non-native. Buffer widths must be increased significantly and standardized in all SEDs and restored from previous SMP drafts. That is to prevent flooding from sea level rise and keep costs lower. Now, WDFW has a tool called the SBTH tool that creates a standardized buffer width that will protect people, both people and ecological functions from sea level rise, a benefit for future generations. A Thurston County Marine Resources Committee must be established to create state and local efforts to protect the county's ecological functions and natural resources. Thank you.
Next, I have Keith Phillips.
Hello, my name is Keith Phillips. I'm a resident of Tenino, 449 4th Avenue. I have some thoughts on aquaculture in Puget Sound. Washington is spending billions of dollars to restore salmon, eelgrass, and forage fish in Puget Sound. Yet there is a loss of marine life and terrestrial habitat every time a geoduck farm is established. If at 4 years in one location, industrial geoduck aquaculture is permanent use. My personal recommendations are to create environmentally effective development standards for shellfish aquaculture, which include 1, avoid plastics and microplastics, which cause starvation in birds and marine life. Minimize or limit predator-controlled netting to reduce the risk of birds being trapped. 3, restrict the use of plastics in estuaries. 4, avoid estuaries until aquaculture as a disturbance can be understood in the marine estuary landscape, and limit predator-controlled netting to reduce the risk of birds being trapped, or so on. I suggest the employment of the best available sciences, not short-term corporate profits. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Tom Klingman.
evening. My name's Tom Klingman. I live on Lake St. Clair, 10318 Wildwood Lane. I have comments that are broader than the last few comments and pertain to both the code and its implementation. So first, the issue of conformity, nonconformity has come up a lot. The Shoreline Act designates residential as a preferred use of the shoreline. And at least as it pertains to the residential lakes we have, like Lake St. Clair, it's real clear to me that those residences are conforming. They're a preferred use, and hopefully we can stop swirling on that topic. Second is on science. There's been a lot of science developed in the last couple decades about Puget Sound shorelines, about the highly sensitive nature of things like even just docks that create a shadow in one area of the shoreline, how it impedes the salmon moving through, and bulkheads and how they starve the beach of sediment because our beaches are all fed by those different segments along the shoreline. It's very important that those standards be implemented both in the code and through staff work. But I'd also ask that we be careful and not have standards that apply in marine shorelines kind of bleed over into conditions where they don't apply on our residential lakes where we have zero or very few salmon moving through. At Lake St. Clair, we have none. Last, on this issue of letters of exemption, you'll see that in the code. That, I think, is a very clearly a little piece of 1972 floating through to our time. 50 years ago, we did not have zoning, except in a little piece of Thurston County. We didn't have critical area ordinances, wetland protection. People needed to understand that standards applied whether you needed one of these fancy substantial development permits or not. 50 years later, everybody understands standards in a code apply whether you need a particular permit or you don't. Those letters of exemption, there may be cases, especially on the marine shoreline, where actions can have such a deleterious effect that you need an additional review. But for the most common kinds of uses, like on our residential shorelines, please, let's get rid of those letters of exemption. They've become permits, and they are just not needed. They're superfluous, and they're a little shred of 1972 floating through for the last 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Lawrence Westergaard. Okay. Okay. Next, I have Joseph McNulty.
Hi, I'm Joe McNulty, 9938 62nd Avenue Southeast on Lake St. Clair. Just had a quick question, and I think this is the way I can do it. What environmental impact research has been done to determine what, in fact, setbacks should be? So there's various opinions and speculations and codes, but has any of that actually been measured along shorelines recently to determine, whether, the impact is within reasonable standards or is in need of change?
We don't answer to questions today, sir. You have.
Oh, okay. I was told you did. Thank you.
Next, I have Chris Hayduck. Nope. Okay. Next, I have Rick Helsbert.
Rick Hillsberg, 811 Old Pacific Highway Southeast. Not so much testimony as questions. I found out about this hearing at noon today and was wondering if we were supposed to get a mailing, and I quickly called a dozen other people down in the valley, and no one had received anything about any info about the hearing. the Thompson family, the Schilter family, and then some other people that live on 7th Ave, 6th Ave, and Pacific Highway. So that was one question. The other question is, Steve Brown saw a guy putting a mark on a telephone pole and asked him what it was, and he said it's the high mark. I don't know if this is related to this, for the 96 flood. And it was at 5 feet. During the 96 flood, I was at Olympic Arms and watching it over for Bob Schutz because my horses were adjacent to his property on 3 acres, and I spent the night there on the next day. If it was 5 foot, my horses and I would have been treading water. They were actually grazing on the grass. And so I don't know where that data came from or how it came about, but it's incorrect. I was there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Phyllis Farrell.
Greetings. My name is Phyllis Farrell, and I live in unincorporated Thurston County. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the draft SMP. Overall, I think the draft has many good provisions and improvements, but there are some areas that still need to be addressed. The minority report recommendation should be inserted in the SMP, incorporating the ecology SMP handbook guidelines. Vegetation buffers. The proposed provisions are not protective enough to meet SMA policy goals and prevent net loss. Reducing buffers will make mitigation and restoration efforts more expensive and complicated. Projected sea level rise might shorten buffers. Adopt the site potential tree height recommendations for riparian ecosystems, and include the ecology recommendations for type F streams with buffers of 250 feet. The non-native vegetation allowance for use and mitigation in the Planning Commission recommendation should be removed, and restrict the use of variances in critical shoreline areas. On armoring, the Puget Sound Partnership recommends reduction of shoreline armoring by 25%, more protective permitting requirements, and substituting soft or natural armoring for impervious bulkheads. Require soft armoring for repairs and limit armoring expansions. Docks should be prohibited in natural designations. Maintain the requirement that docks must be graded to allow light, and limit new docks and require multifamily or community docks. On aquaculture, the principle of adaptive management should be applied to aquaculture. In order to guarantee no net loss, require metrics of each individual site to determine net loss and cumulative effects. And adopt a better policy of monitoring, inspections, and enforcement on aquaculture permits. Report permit violations and consequences. And the use of plastics for aquaculture must be eliminated and sustainable practices required. Hydraulic harvesting should be prohibited in favor of sustainable techniques. One more sentence.
Please wrap it up, ma'am.
One more sentence? Okay. Require individual aquaculture permits. Don't allow consolidated permits for the convenience of the industry, in as much as conditions from site to site may vary greatly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tom Solberg.
You call me? No, I'm gonna let these other people explain what's going on.
Okay, next I have Kirby. Here is named Kirby.
Kirby Nork, or
Thor, is it TH?
Kirby,
Kirby?
Holmes Island Road.
Okay,
I'm not gonna speak.
okay. Next, I have Richard Brantz. No? Okay. William Mitchell. Not speaking. Okay. Mike.
Beeler?
Beeler? There we go. Okay.
Printing, I wouldn't even write.
I gotcha.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us to make presentation tonight. My name is Mike Beeler. I live at 7308 Fair Oaks Road, adjacent to Lake Patterson. I've been a resident of Thurston County since 1978 and have lived adjacent to Lake Patterson since 1997. I'm also a former member and chair of the Lacey Planning Commission, so I have a little bit of empathy, not only for the Planning Commission, but also for the commissioners in trying to work through these issues. But thank you for your attention. As a personal note, one of my Boy Scout badges was soil conservation, which I'm very proud of. And I practiced that throughout my whole life, wherever I've lived. And I do that currently on my own property, or my wife's property, actually. She's also a taxpayer. Luckily, our setback is probably sufficient for where our house is currently, since it was built in the late 90s. But I'm really speaking for other people whose properties or legacy properties have been there for 60, 70 years on Lake Patterson and are very close to the waterfront, unlike mine. So I really strongly recommend that you consider keeping the 50-foot setback for any new construction, obviously, but also to treat the existing structures as conforming. And I gave that testimony at one of the work sessions many years ago. I forget how many years ago it was, up on the hill over there. But that's a really important issue, is to not penalize people for what they already have. And if you change the goal line, don't say, okay, you violated the goal. They were there before the goal was changed. I also want to comment that in spite of the fact that I've got a deep lot, what I've done is put a lot of native vegetation and remove invasive species that I found when I got the property back in the late 90s. So I continue to do that. So again, I request that you support the 50-foot setback for residential properties, and also make sure that we're not put into the non-conforming category. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Alex Nielsen.
Hi there, my name is Alex Nielsen. I'm Vice President of Nielsen Pacific Limited and fifth generation owner-operator of several parcels on the intersection of Old Pacific Highway Southeast and Durgin Road, 6 of which parcels are going to be affected by the SMR or SMP. And I have, really this is an in-person follow-up on a written record that I sent in earlier today of 2 requests, generally regarding the Nisqually Valley. The first having to do with requesting supporting documents and data to be made public that set the flood of record height at a specifically NS08 flood reference monument. The reason for that being is people close to me, particularly my father, was actually there of the flood at the high point at 1996. And it was nowhere near the 5 foot above the road that the marker is indicating. And that level has broad implications for the whole valley of how far that MSP, Shorewater Master Program reaches. My second request is for a time frame and a process, a formal process for property owners, especially in the valley and all through Thurston County, to submit either survey data or topographical information that they may have or request regarding certain areas and their impact, especially due to flooding or the shoreline. This is because in particular, there are certain areas that say are impacted or are marked as a flood zone via the high mark of the flood of 1996. And that map incorporates quite a few areas of hills that rise well above the 30.23 feet that's indicated in that flood, which makes me wonder if there are errors in the mapping. And so I think it'd be appropriate to have a process or a form and able to receive that information and readjust as necessary. So thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Next, I have Terry and Ken Stewart.
because we can't ask any questions, I'm not gonna say anything.
Okay,
Could I say something?
go ahead.
Ma'am, you can ask questions, we just don't answer at this point. I didn't know if you heard what she said. But somebody will take it into consideration.
I'm Terry Stewart, my husband Ken, we live at 15727 Wildera Drive on Lake Lawrence. And the property has been in the family since 1966, so my question was, are we gonna be like grandfathered in or left alone, or are we gonna have problems because of the bulkhead, the dock, the cabin, the house? So that was only my question or concern.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Next, I have Cheryl Solberg. Oh, I didn't sign up to speak. Thank you. Next, I have Bill Joplin Holmes. Next, I have Tracy Paris. Okay. Next, I have Bob Lanuette.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Bob Lanowette. My wife and I live at 7112 Holmes Island Road. Lucky to be on Long Lake. I've been a lakeside property owner since 2013, and I've attended the Thurston County Planning Commission meetings that discussed the shoreline management program for the past 5 or 6 years. So I feel like I have a good feel for what the planning commissioners talked about and worked on. I've observed the commissioners discuss and give thoughtful consideration to environmental impacts versus citizen impacts. They went through multiple drafts of the SMP line for line, and you know that that is a very large document, multiple hundred of pages of information. Your planning commissioners reached sound decisions concerning the SMP. The planning commissioner's SMP recommendation draft forward to you should be accepted and approved. Based upon my understanding at a recent Board of County Commissioners meeting, there remain a few decision points that I'd like to address at this point. 50-foot setbacks. Approve that setback of 50 feet. Most houses now on lakes are at the 50-foot. Imagine owning a parcel of property, fortunately, that you would have on a lake, and the setback is set at 85. And you need to set your new house at 85 feet, 35 feet behind your neighbors. You'd have a great view of a small view of the lake and a great view of their backyard. That would not be good. Legally constructed houses. Approve the term conforming and do not approve the term non-conforming. There are countless examples in our world.
Please wrap it up, sir.
I'll be finished in a second, thank you. Where regulations have changed after construction. Plumbing, electric. Imagine having a 4-year-old automobile, putting it up for sale as a non-conforming automobile. That would be disastrous. And that's what you're approaching with the term non-conforming versus conforming. Finally, I would like to praise the planning commissioners for their service and yeoman's work in completing the shoreline management program.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Jennifer Rosales.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for the time and the energy that you have put in to this process over the last many years. I am Jennifer Rosales. My husband and I live at 7422 20th Avenue Southeast, also on lovely Long Lake. We've lived there for about 18 years and bought the property to have a respite and a place to call home and a place of peace. We care as homeowners and lakefront owners about the water quality and spend a significant amount of energy and money in managing that shoreline and in maintaining it, removing invasive species, and ensuring the quality of the water. I don't think you'll find people more passionate about lake quality than those of us who live on it. So thank you for your attention to a couple of things. In the updated draft of the Shoreline Master Plan, 3.5% or so of the total acreage on water in Thurston County is designated as shoreline residential. So I'm speaking specifically to shoreline residential requirements. My house is right at 50 feet off the water, and I ask that you maintain that 50-foot setback for a number of reasons. Secondly, to echo the previous speaker, also ask that you identify existing legally built structures as conforming. There are significant consequences if they are considered non-conforming and other exceptions. Other counties across the state have identified existing structures as conforming, so we would ask that you maintain that in the current draft. Thank you for your time.
Next, I have Meredith Rafferty. Yes.
Everybody's got knees. Yeah, thank you, sir. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Meredith Rafferty. I am a homeowner and a longtime resident of unincorporated Thurston County. I and my neighbors have participated in this SMP update since its beginnings in 2014. Our home and those of our neighbors are along Thurston County's saltwater waterfront, and we are deeply affected by the SMP. The 200-foot SMP jurisdiction covers our entire properties from front to back, and therefore details our use. Yet, we understand the need to protect our vital Puget Sound and have attempted to do so. The act has been in place for nearly 52 years. And we believe we have a direct interest and responsibility to do so. We do have requests. We've submitted a detailed letter, but here is a summary. We too request revision of the non-conforming wording in the 1990 SMP. Please declare us legal and conforming. The issue is that it makes us vulnerable because it does not spell out what happens when you're non-conforming. We are told that nothing would happen because of this, but in these days when there are legal challenges galore, we would like to see it in writing. A 2011 law, the legislature addressed this issue and authorizes this clarification. With regard to the widths of additional buffers and setbacks, we support the widths recommended by the Planning Commission. The Department of Ecology has an SMP handbook available to everyone, which explains how to apply its regulations. On page 27, they explain that buffers, setbacks, and development regulations will vary among jurisdictions because they are tailored to local conditions and the shoreline ecological functions that are present.
Please wrap it up, ma'am.
A buffer that is appropriate for one shoreline is not appropriate for all. This document provides more protection for Puget Sound. We ask for your support of the draft update as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Next is Virginia Gunderson. Okay. Next, I have Vicki Tugg. Lisa Reiner.
Yes, my name is Lisa Reiner, and I live at 2103 Harrison Avenue, 40-year resident of Thurston County. Thank you for having this public participation in the discussion of the SMP. I urge the adoption of this SMP. Many of us in this room have attended Planning Commission after Planning Commission way before the pandemic discussing these issues. It has been studied up the yin yang, and this is for future generations. I own property on the water. I know what it is to have property and be subjected to issues regarding the water right there, the water body. But you are making a decision regarding the future of this county, and water is life. We must protect our waters. My husband and I enjoy going out on Butt Inlet. I have seen the deterioration of Butt Inlet. It's full of jellyfish. The eel grass is gone. I have seen it deteriorate year after being here 40 years. Less salmon, less birds, less seals. It's amazing. And then also when we go hiking, climate change is going to affect these water bodies. We know this. And so it's up to you to make a decision for future generations that are going to be crowding in here and saying, what happened to our streams? What happened to our water bodies? Why weren't they protected? Because water is life. We must protect our water. I urge you to adopt this SMP. It's been reviewed by the Department of Ecology. It's been reviewed by citizens for a long time, and we've had discussion after discussion on the intricate details of these water bodies, and we expect you to adopt this. And it hasn't been talked about climate change, how it's going to affect these water bodies. So that is a big issue. We must just talk about climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Okay. Okay, next is Kathy Where are we?
What's the address?
It's Hills Engineering.
That's me. I'm the client.
Okay. Richard Neems.
My name's Richard Nemes. My wife and I live on 15831 Wild Air Drive, southeast in Yelm on Lake Lawrence. Appreciate the chance to address the board today. While I have not read the entire 466-page report, nor do I profess to understand everything I have read, I do have several areas of concern. The two I'll focus on are conforming, non-conforming, and changes in setback. When I built my home, I met all county and state requirements and have signed off permit sheet to prove it. At the time and today, I am in conformance. The state law provides that if standards are changed, the existing structure is still in conformance. Why is the minority report planning to make 11 of the 20 residents on the lake in my community non-conforming? I'm no lawyer, but there's a big difference in charges and fees for future changes if you are non-conforming. Second issue is the setback. Once again, 50 to 75 feet. I have seen no documentation to suggest this change will have any impact on the shoreline from properties that are already developed. The only possible reason to do this is increase permit requirements and revenue. If increase in revenue is the objective, then be straightforward and raise taxes, not permit requirements. I shouldn't have to get a permit to plant a shrub. Finally, I would like to know why the board accepted the minority report versus the majority report. I'll cut, since I only have 26 seconds, I'm going to cut it short. The questions I have, where do I find answers to? Where can I get answers for the questions that me and these other people have asked? We have questions, where can we get the answers? You say we can't get the answers here, where can we get them?
Staff will follow up with those answers, sir.
Okay,
business cards over here. I'm the staff lead on the Shoreline Master Program.
Because people come here for answers. And so I understand there's a lot of people here, but at the same time, we would like to have some answers to why some of these issues, have occurred and not get staff answers after the fact that basically the decision's already been made. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Kelly Butcher. Carpenter Road. Okay. Next, I have John Woodford.
Hello, my name is John Woodford. I live at 7541 Holmes Island Road. I live on Holmes Island in Long Lake. I'll be real brief. Adopt the draft that was presented to you by the Planning Commission. We've all been in a long, long battle. I'm chairman of the Thurston County Shoreline Stakeholders Coalition, and we as a group have been very active in working with planning staff. We haven't always seen the same ideas exactly, but I think the Planning Commission draft really does protect the rights of homeowners, property owners, and is a vast improvement in environmental protection from the 1990 SMP that we are now operating under. A couple of other real quick things which people have already mentioned. If you adopt the draft, this is part of it, but keep the 50-foot buffer in shoreline residential. It's been there. My home was built in 1955, and it was a 50-foot setback then. You didn't have a buffer, but and that's been the case. It's part of the 1990 Shoreline Master Program. To increase it does nothing but wrap the buffer around our homes. We only, the shoreline residential is only 3.5% of the acreage of shoreline property in the county. And it's already built out. There aren't vacant lots. And also, all legally built homes should be conforming. State law says they're conforming. I don't know why this keeps coming back. Staff keeps pushing it back, and
Please
it
wrap it up, sir.
serves no purpose. Thank you.
Next, I have Ezekiel Line. Okay. Next, I have Jeff Butchker. From Carpenter Road? No? Okay. I have Keith Phillips again. He signed it twice. Next, I have Adam Fawcett.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for the chance to say some stuff in front of you before we make some big decisions that affect all of our lives. We've been coming to these meetings for years, and it's great to see it close to the finish line, so thanks for that. My concerns are with residential, the shoreline residential SED. If it's already been developed and the house is there, it was conforming when it was built, it's conforming now, and it should stay conforming. There's no reason to separate something that was built with state law in mind and permitting in mind, to separate those people from the rest of the herd so they can be taken advantage of further down the road. There's lots of cases of this being done across the country, and not saying that you guys would do that now, but further down the road, if we are separated from the herd, then it's easy to pick on us for extra permits or taxes or any kind of easements that they want to put on us because we are separated from the herd. Please keep the shoreline buffers at 50 feet. I live on an island. Adam Fawcett, 7546 Holmes Island Road, John's neighbor. And I think there'd be one property on the island if the setback was changed for more than 50 feet, because 50 feet pretty much gets us to the street. And there's only one street on the island. Yeah, please accept the S&P recommendation draft. And there's no reason to go above and beyond what the state required for minimums. Thank you.
Sir, before you go, can you state your name for the record, please?
Adam Fawcett.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I have Kirk Van Ledigen.
Hello, I'm Kirk Van Landigan. I live on Black Lake at 5825 Black Lake, Belmore. And first thing with the 50-foot setback, you don't need to go farther than 50 feet. From what I understand from the code is there's an additional 15 feet added onto that buffer for a setback if you're going to build a new residence. So in essence, if there's any new building, it's already at 65 feet. The other thing I do like how everything's been broken out for marines versus lakes versus streams. However, with the application requirement for docks, it appears to apply to all four. And some of the things here that you need to do to apply for a dock, and I'm specifically referring to the residential lake aspect of it, where everyone should have a dock. But the application asks if what the length, height, and width of mooring structures on adjacent properties are. I'm not sure what that is for or what the criteria would be, or with these sort of things, if it, what it's about. It's not very clear. For instance, if, here's one, it's number 7. If a residential moorage demonstrate the existing facilities, including public moorage within 10 driving miles of the applicant's parcel on the marine shoreline, are not adequate or feasible to accommodate the proposed moorage. Now, it says marine shoreline, but it's also part of the application for lakes. And so I think that, you know, of course, on a lake, there's, I don't know if there's lakes longer than 10 miles out here, but it seems to me if someone's taking your application in, that they're looking at this and they're saying, well, with you're within 10 miles. And so I think there needs to be an exception to the residentials on lakes, that it should be an easier application requirement. And that's it, thank you. And again, specifically, if you look at items 5, 6, 7, and 9. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Barry Halverson.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Barry Halverson. I live in southeast Thurston County on Lake Lawrence. I found the minority report to be disconnected from public testimony. Over the last 12 years, this draft was being reviewed, and I was personally sitting in the audience in all but a few of the 81 work sessions held by the Planning Commission. One of the biggest areas of public concern was the cost associated with the permit process and the frequency of requiring a costly hearing to obtain a permit for something as simple as building a dock or making a needed landscaping change to their shoreline. Administrative permit procedures should be more widely accepted, and the Planning Commission recognized that. The other disconnect was in shoreline environmental designations and corresponding buffer widths. The minority report suggests that the Planning Commission recommended changes decreased buffer widths by as much as 50%. The truth is, the Planning Commission recommendation increased all buffer widths proportionally from the 1990 Shoreline Master Program, except for shoreline residential, which it recommended remain the same. This whole thing about buffers, that was an SMP draft recommendation by staff that set those buffers high. It was not in the 1990 SMP. All the SMP recommendations that the Planning Commission set were higher than the 1990 SMP, except shoreline residential, which remained the same. This does not result in loss of ecological function, but improves upon it. The minority report's recommendation to increase buffer width beyond those recommended by the Planning Commission in all categories would have no significant effect in no net loss, but would significantly increase cost to impacted homeowners through higher permit fees and reduced home values. As shown in the county's cumulative impacts analysis, only 35% of all county shoreline acreage is designated as shoreline residential. You would therefore once again be placing the highest financial burden on the smallest segment of the county's population. And increasing property shoreline values would negatively impact property
Let's wrap it up,
values.
sir.
One more sentence. Is the county assessor prepared to conduct reevaluation of all shoreline properties in the county and reduce their property values accordingly, thereby impacting county property taxes? I'll send you the rest of my comments by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Bob Zeke. Okay, next I have
Helen Wheatley.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Helen Wheatley. I'm a resident of Olympia, 2218 McCormick Court, and I'm a member of the Planning Commission, and I'm the lead author on the Minority Report. So I have a somewhat different opinion about it than some other testimony, but I don't really want to spend my time refuting it this evening. I support the current draft as it's been revised with input from the Departments of Ecology and Fish and Wildlife. The Minority Report looked very carefully at those guidelines, and we were concerned that whatever the SMP is, it be consistent with guidelines and I'm eager to see an updated version implemented soon so that the current laws apply. But what I want to say, in addition to supporting the current proposed draft, is that even after you pass it, I would strongly encourage you to not finish it, consider it being finished, because the SMP is part of the comprehensive plan, and the Growth Management Act applies to the SMP. And as you are probably aware, but many members of the public are probably not, there's been a whole new climate element introduced to the comprehensive plan. Just this year, HB 1181 adds a climate change element to the comp plan. And I just want to introduce some of the concepts in there that apply to shorelines and encourage you to really keep it at the front of the line, even in considering the revisions to the comp plan after you complete this process. The SMP really does need to incorporate climate change and climate resiliency. Oh boy, and it's all over already. Okay, well, there are concepts just real quickly like green infrastructure, green space, providing migration for vital ecosystems. As they decline in one place, you need corridors for it to go to other places. You need to now consider climate impacts like sea level rise. So there are just a lot of new elements now, and it's really worth keeping it on the forefront as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Eric Casino.
Nope.
No?
Look, he's coming. Eric,
He's shaking his head.
Okay.
Okay. Next is Debbie Smith. Cindy Garrison. Oh, okay. Michael Barber.
Margaret Milhouse. Don Cork.
Don Cole, 3241 Francis Drive Southeast, Long Lake resident for 19 years. As you heard from many others, please approve the SMP as recommended by the Planning Commission without any amendments. Although I'm not thrilled about everything that I find in all the restrictions that in practice may not benefit the environment, the proposed SMP did go through public process, seems like a reasonable compromise between shoreline management and the practical use of existing properties. The Planning Commission recognized that environmental impacts have already occurred in that built-out environment with the residential shorelines. They're already highly regulated, and that further regulation would have appreciable impact to the environment. Please disregard the minority report presented by latecomers to the SMP process. It unfairly circumvents the extensive deliberation of the full public process, as other folks have talked about. If this minority, the minority report contains incorrect statements, which would have been challenged in a full public process. It states that the SMP does not meet the WAC, would not be improved by ecology, which is incorrect. For example, the minority report offers their opinion that shorter buffers would not be approved by ecology, which is wrong. In fact, ecology has approved reduced buffers in many jurisdictions and even provides examples of reduced buffers in their SMP guideline document. And also, please be aware that increasing the shoreline buffer by additional 25 feet, as proposed by the minority report, creates substantial hardship to, as you heard in the testimony, most homes would now become what they call non-conforming. And according to the appendix in the SMP guidelines, if you look at the appendix about the buffers, that an increase from 50 feet to 75 feet would only provide an approximate 1% reduction in nitrate and sediment removal. However, the impacts on the property would be great. Thank you.
Next, I have Tim Ames. Next, I have Doug Carmen.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Doug Carmen. I live at 4108 Cairo Road in the unincorporated part of Lacey. Thank you for the opportunity for coming forward. I've already sent in formal comments, but I wanted to point out a couple of things here today. First of all, recommend you move forward with the Planning Commissioner's recommendations. Those who moved that recommendation forward were done by planning commissioners who have been involved in the process since the beginning, either as a planning commissioner or as being there in attendance to all the work sessions. I myself started attending work sessions in 2009 before this process, this final moving forward started. So that's when it was working in the first time around, when it was supposed to be done in 2011. Second thing is, I'll repeat something that Barry Halverson mentioned, is that there seems to be a misconception that the planning commissioners reduced the buffers in the recommendation, and that's not true. The buffers were actually increased in some and remained the same for shoreline residential. And I'll repeat that 98% to 99% of the shoreline residential designation is already developed. The houses were already built in accordance with code. So to change the buffers to wider, it serves no purpose except to penalize them. The other is using the word conforming versus non-conforming. The houses are conforming when they were built. They should be conforming now. They don't need to be called non-conforming. They're not required by law to do that. And the legislature even did a clarification of that in saying that it does not have to be non-conforming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Jamie.
Madam Chair, just a minute. I have a hand up on the Zoom. For those members of the public who have joined us via Zoom, I will call your name as soon as the in-person testimony is completed.
Okay. Next, I have Jamie.
Yeah, I don't write very well, do I? Hello, how are you tonight? I'm Jamie Challoner, James Challoner, and I live at 15837 and 15835 Wild Air Drive Southeast. My family's owned this property since 1965. So we've been great stewards of the 50-foot buffer that is in place now for years. So we maintain our property to ultimate specifications on that shoreline because we realize the water quality and shoreline quality is the most important. We need to keep the buffers at 50 feet. Reading the material at 75 feet would wrap around most houses and making them non-conforming when the state of Washington RCW 90-58-620 recognizes as conforming. And I'm really not sure how this contributes to a no net loss of ecological functions, because I look at my neighbors and they keep the beaches, you know, their shoreline nice and pristine. If this is approved, this will require permitting to change anything on a house structure, landscape around a house, etc. Shoreline residents, SED properties account for only 3.5% of the total county shoreline acreage. So that's very limited for lakes. What it sounds like to me is Thurston County wants to make a little more money on permitting. In conclusion, we need to go with the Planning Commission SMP recommendation draft, keep this 50-foot buffer, and keep all housings as conforming. You got to ask yourself, if this was your property, would you want all these restrictions? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Alan Bennett.
Next, I have Michael Grotzky.
Good evening, Commissioners. Forgive my handwriting. My name is hard to say, much less spell. My name is Michael Sorosky. I live at 3041 46th Avenue Northwest in Olympia. I've been a resident since July 9th, 2021. The home that we purchased was built in 1965. My primary concerns as related to this process relate to the inclusion or lack of inclusion and discussion as to the process related to my property, specifically the areas of MEL 29 and 30. Candidly, we have not received any notice, site visits, or opportunity to discuss or engage in the process related to the Shoreline Master Plan and the SED. My close secondary concern as it relates to stewardship. I'm a father of three, and our family enjoys the property robustly. My children are good stewards. They go down to the water's edge along Eld Inlet and Green Cove Creek and pick up debris that was there before we owned the property. Our goal is to maintain that intent of stewardship by enjoying the property we live on, maintaining the trails that are already there, and ensuring invasive species are controlled so that native species can thrive. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you. Next, I have Darren Smith. Next, Dan Mays.
Gary Melhoff. Chris Ivy.
Good evening. My name's Chris Ivy. I live at 16438 Pleasant Beach Drive on Lawrence Lake. Been a Thurston County resident for 51 years. Moved to the lake 4 years ago And, you know, we have a lot invested in our place. You know, it was a lifelong dream to live on the lake. Our taxes have gone up, doubled in 4 years. So I have a concern what would happen if this buffer changed. It's going to wrap my house. I have concerns on what's going to happen with the existing structures. If a guy wanted to add on a garage, is he going to get a permit? You know, and if this takes place, are the taxes going to follow the depreciation in this land? Because I can tell you, most people, if their house is listed as non-conforming, they're probably, and they're looking to move on the lake, they're probably going to be finding something else. Like, I wouldn't invest $800,000 in a house that is legally non-conforming. So I ask that the existing buffers stay the same and that the current residents maintain conforming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's everyone who I have that signed up. Is there anyone else in the boardroom who didn't get a chance to speak that would like to speak now? Going once? No? Okay, we'll move on to Zoom. County Manager, will you help me with?
Yes, I'm moving into the Zoom meeting now, and I will call your name based on the order that I have in my screen. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, state your name for the record, where you reside in the county, and you will have 2 minutes. First, I have Kim Nelson.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, ma'am, you have 2 minutes.
Super great. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Kim Nelson, and my husband Jay and I live on Lake Lawrence at 18130 Lisa Lane. So the county proposal is to designate our house and the 5 others that exist in our development as rural conservancy, which is for sustained resource use, public access, and conserving ecological, historical, and cultural resources. However, since there are a total of 6 plots with 6 permitted houses, garages, and most of us have docks that are permitted, I am asking that you correct the designation and change it to Shoreline Residential, since this is a residential development, and that would be in line with the majority of the rest of Lawrence Lake. Secondly, while my house is at the 200 foot from the watermark, I do think that all houses should be grandfathered in and classified as conforming since they followed the permitting process at the time, you know, given the rules at that time. Non-conforming does imply that people are not following the rules, which is inaccurate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have John Callery.
Yes, I'm John Callery from 4412 Green Cove Street, Northwest Olympia. Just want to say that the Green Park Community Club agrees with the natural designation for our portion of Green Cove on Eld Inlet. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ross Robb. Next, Dan Moffett.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Dan Moffett. Thanks for the opportunity to share my opinions on this important matter, the Shoreline Master Plan. I'm a Thurston County Lake Shoreline property owner at Lawrence Lake, have been for 30 plus years. After following this SMP issue for many years and providing input to the commission at several key points along the way, I'd like to take my concerns, like you to take my concerns into consideration. I am significantly concerned about the legal status of existing legally developed and properly used shoreline structures. Whether they're formally allowed, current shoreline structures may not meet the current standards for new development. So my wish is that for areas that have been assigned a shoreline environmental designation of shoreline residential, I ask that you designate and approve as conforming any residential structures and appurtenant structures that were legally established and are used for a conforming use, but that do not meet the standards to be considered conforming structure now. Such things like setbacks, buffers, yards, area, bulk, height, density, and redevelopment expansion. change with the class of occupancy or replacement of residential structure if it is consistent with the master program, including requirements for no net loss of shoreline functions. Classifying currently existing structures as legally conforming will not create a risk of degrading shoreline natural resources. It is in the public's interest to clarify the legal status of these structures that will apply after shoreline regulations are updated. I urge you to accept, adopt, and support the Planning Commission recommendation draft. This seems to be a reasonable path forward towards a no net loss of function while protecting and balancing homeowners' rights of use. For areas that have been assigned an SED of shoreline residential, keep the shoreline residential buffers at 50 feet. I urge you to reject the provisions of the Planning Commission Minority Report dated August 8th, 2002. I don't think the Minority Report accurately accounts for the years of public testimony and work sessions to be fully responsive to Thurston County's needs and desires. Thank you for this opportunity. Again, that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Next, Deborah Jackson.
That's me, Deborah Jackson. I live on Holmes Island Road, 7503. And I really haven't prepared anything to speak to this, but I do want to say that I agree with leaving the current buffers where they're at, and also ask to use the conforming and not the non-conforming verbiage with our homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Kim Nelson.
You already called her.
Oh, you already called her, sorry. Chris Lester.
No comment.
Thank you. Tris Carlson.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Tris Carlson. I live at 6936 Puget Beach Road on Nisqually Reach. And my history is that I have spent the last 20 plus years working in the environmental portion of the county work. I was the chairman of the Nisqually Reach Henderson Inlet Shellfish Protection District. I've been on the Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board. And what I would like to just say shortly is that you should accept the current SMP draft as is, get on with it. I've watched this thing since 2007. I was the original member of the STAG committee, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. And I've watched this thing morph over time, and it's time to get it on and get it accepted so that we can get ready for the next one, which should be in another 8 years, and we can address things like climate change and other cumulative impacts. And just to make it clear, I'm also an aquaculturist, so I do have some issues there, but I also spent a number of years in the aquaculture industry and the permitting of aquaculture sites through the Corps of Engineers, the counties, and ecology. So let's accept this SMP draft as is and move on and get ready for the next one. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Marianne Verjicon. My apologies for the last name. Next, Vivian Chambers. Next, Esther Cronenberg.
Hi, I'm Esther Cronenberg. I live on Green Cove Creek, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Clean Black Lake Alliance, and also as a co-petitioner with Jerry Jerka on a petition to the governor asking to repeal the MDNS regulation that the county used here for the SMP. We've already submitted comments that urge you to adopt the more protective recommendations of the minority opinion of the Planning Commission. But that's really not sufficient. It's already outdated. And as people have said, there's climate change, there's species extinction, there's the huge amount of 100,000 plus more people that are in the county now since, in just over the last 20 years. So we urge you to consider the SMP for further review in the comp plan update, and to this time to do it with an EIS to legally identify the impacts. The Shoreline Management Act's intent is to protect the shoreline and not make it easier to build on it. The county didn't consider changes since its own 2013 inventory and characterization of the shoreline. Instead, it's now starting a baseline and now starting to monitor, when you could have at least had the last 10 years to see what's changed over the last 10 years, let alone the 50 years since the Shoreline Management Act was passed. So tracking cumulative impacts on a project by project basis, as the county plans to do now, does not conform to the Shoreline Management Act, which is to quote, prevent the inherent harm in uncoordinated and piecemeal development of the state's shoreline. And I don't know if you even have a dedicated funding source to do this tracking, but it's already sort of like, it's way late to now start tracking and use the already degraded environment that we're faced with as the baseline. So I'm concerned about that. Also, in terms of,
Please wrap it up.
okay, and also in terms of an MDNS, the SEPA requires that any mitigations be identified by an EIS before an MDNS can be issued. The county has to legally identify impacts to mitigate. You're taxing people for mitigations without a legal basis if there's no EIS that identifies the impacts. So that's a flaw in the process of how this was done. So I urge you to do an EIS and include it in the comp plan and adopt what you have for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up.
All right.
Richard Woodford. So anybody in the Zoom who have not testified this afternoon, would like to do so. Last call on the Zoom. That will conclude public testimony, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for all of you who took the time to join us here tonight and provide public comment. And for those who couldn't attend and submitted public testimony as well through either mailing it in or emailing it in. With that, is there any discussion that commissioners would like to have at this time?
I'd like to ask one question maybe, and that'd be of staff probably. There's been quite a bit of mention on climate change and sea level rising and such. Is there a spot that the public can go to and look, and I'll just use an example, the KGY radio station for an example. I've been playing around there. I'm 77 this year, and I've been down there about 70 years. My dad was down there many years before that. And I can't see as we can see any difference when we talk to a lot of the old timers. I don't even consider myself an old timer yet, on the height of the sea level at that particular location, because there's no waves or anything. So is there a spot around that citizens can go to and see for themselves that, well, the mark is still in the same place or it's not in the same place? I mean, just have it be very simple. And because we're going to be talking about this in several more work sessions, and it'd be nice to have something to refer to that's real, not a substitute mark on a pole that we heard about from 96, that wasn't there, but somebody put it there. So anyway, I just asked that question. If we couldn't have that as a response back from at least my perspective, so that I could tell others too that, yeah, go down and look at KGY. There's a mark there and now it's here, whatever. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments, Commissioner Menser?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, our next step,
I was going to highlight the next steps.
well, I was gonna, after we close the public hearing, I was gonna let everyone know of our next following work sessions. So with that, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll move to close the public hearing. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote.
Commissioner Hubbard?
Aye.
Commissioner Menser? Commissioner Mejia?
Aye. The public hearing is now closed. There will be a follow-up briefing that are currently scheduled for Wednesday, May 24th at 9 a.m. Is that correct? And Wednesday, June 14th at 9 a.m. as well. Okay.
And those two briefings will be live streamed.
Oh,
We're still
sorry.
conducting the meeting, sir.
Okay, with that, it is 6:42 PM. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.